mansion glowed with light, music, and laughter. Guests in sparkling dresses and sharp suits moved from room to room, talking in excited voices, holding glasses filled with champagne. The chandeliers above reflected tiny rainbows across the walls, and the piano in the corner looked larger than anything the waitress had ever seen. She had been carrying drinks for hours, moving through the crowd silently, unnoticed. The rich voices and laughter around her made her feel small, but she kept her head down, focused on her job. She had grown used to these kinds of nights, where people celebrated wealth and status, and her role was simple. Make sure drinks were refilled, plates cleared, and smiles maintained. She had learned to move quickly and quietly, to smile politely when a guest complimented the food or the service, and then step away before anyone expected more from her. Tonight, though, something felt different. She noticed the grand piano in the corner. It was black, shiny, and impossibly beautiful, with keys that looked soft under the lights. She had played pianos before in small cafes or empty rooms, but nothing like this. The host of the party, a tall man with a commanding presence, moved through the crowd with a confident air. He laughed loudly, gesturing to guests as he told stories, making everyone around him feel both included and amazed. His eyes scanned the room, and finally, they landed on the waitress. There was something in her quiet composure that caught his attention. Maybe it was the way she moved gracefully among the chaos, or the calm expression she held despite the noise and pressure of the party. He approached her with a slight smile, clearly enjoying a private amusement. "You there," he said, his voice loud enough to carry over the music. She stopped and looked up, startled. All eyes seemed to turn toward her, though she hoped no one was really watching. "Do you play the piano?" he asked. The question was casual, but his tone carried a challenge. She hesitated, her heart pounding. She had played before, yes, but never in front of such a crowd. "A little," she replied softly, hoping that would end the conversation. She did not want attention. She wanted to do her job quietly and leave, but the host only smiled wider. "A little, you say? I dare you to play for us. Come, show us what you can do," he said, pointing toward the piano. A hush fell over the nearby guests as whispers started. Some smiled politely, thinking it was a joke. Others leaned forward, curious to see what would happen. The waitress felt her stomach drop. She had not expected this. Her hands grew clammy, and she took a small step back. She thought about running, about excusing herself to the kitchen, about pretending she hadn't heard. But then she glanced at the piano again. It called to her in a way that made her heart ache. She remembered the evenings she spent alone, her fingers dancing over old keys in empty rooms, the music filling the quiet spaces of her life. She had always believed in her own small talent, the private joy that music gave her, even if no one else ever heard it. She had never played for anyone like this, in front of so many people, in a place where every mistake would be magnified. But she also felt a strange sense of courage rise in her chest. The guests were now clearly watching, some with amusement, others with curiosity. The host's eyes sparkled, like a cat watching a mouse. He clearly expected her to fail or at least to make a nervous, awkward attempt. She took a deep breath, straightened her shoulders, and walked toward the piano. Each step felt heavy but also purposeful. She could feel the eyes on her, but she tried not to look at anyone. She focused on the keys, on the familiar feeling of them beneath her fingers. She sat down on the bench, her hands hovering over the keys. For a moment, the room seemed to quiet around her. The chatter faded, the music from the string quartet in the corner dimmed, and all she could hear was her own heartbeat. She pressed a key, just one, and the sound rang out clear and soft. It was nothing special, just a note, but it felt like a lifeline. She tried another, then another, and the notes began to form a simple melody. Her fingers moved almost instinctively, finding the rhythm and flow that had always been in her memory. The guests started to lean forward, their amusement turning into surprise. The melody was not just music. It carried feeling, expression, and a quiet confidence that no one had expected from a young waitress. The host stopped smiling in amusement and watched intently. Some of the guests exchanged glances, realizing that this was not just a simple joke performance. The music was alive and it was hers. She played a short piece, a mixture of gentle movements and dramatic swells, her hands moving faster now, more confidently. She could feel the energy in the room change. People stopped talking, glasses paused midair, and all eyes were on her. She had never played like this for anyone other than herself, but something about the challenge, the dare, made her performance more powerful than she could have imagined. It was as if every small moment of practice, every quiet evening at home had led to this instant. The host finally broke into a genuine smile, nodding his head in appreciation. She had surpassed his expectations, and it was clear. The guests began to clap softly at first, then louder as the realization grew that this was a talent hidden in plain sight. She felt a flush of embarrassment but also pride. She had done what she did not think she could, and it had worked. She had claimed a space in the room, not as a waitress or an invisible observer, but as a musician, as someone whose skill and heart could touch others. When she finished the piece, there was a pause, a moment of complete silence, and then the applause broke out. It was warm, genuine, and unlike any attention she had ever received. She felt her cheeks burn, not from shame, but from the thrill of being seen, truly seen, for who she was. The host walked over to her and extended a hand, helping her rise from the bench. "Incredible," he said, his tone sincere. "Truly incredible. I did not expect that." She smiled softly, still catching her breath. "Thank you," she said simply. She wanted to return to her role as a server, to disappear again, but she knew the world had just shifted a little. The guests whispered among themselves, some asking who she was, some already planning to hear more from her. She realized that her life, quiet and predictable, had been touched by this one daring moment. As she moved back to her serving duties, her mind was buzzing. She replayed the music in her head, felt the way her fingers had moved, the sound that had come from the piano. For the first time in a long time, she felt confident in her own talent, and she understood that courage sometimes meant stepping into the light, even when fear screamed to stay hidden. She could not have known what opportunities might come from this night, but she knew one thing clearly. She had proven something to herself, something that no one could take away. The rest of the evening passed in a blur. She continued to serve drinks, clearing plates, smiling politely, but the way people looked at her had changed. Some recognized her quietly, giving nods of respect. The host checked in occasionally, giving a look of approval, a small smile that said, "You are remarkable." And through it all, she carried the secret satisfaction of knowing she had revealed a part of herself that the world had not expected, a part that would not be hidden again. By the end of the night, as the guests began to leave and the mansion quieted, she cleaned up the remnants of the party with a sense of calm pride. She had faced the challenge, accepted the dare, and discovered the truth of her own hidden genius. The piano remained in the corner, gleaming under the fading lights, a silent witness to the moment that had changed her forever. And though she would return to her ordinary life the next day, something inside her had shifted. The world had shown her a glimpse of possibility, and she could not ignore it. She knew that this was only the beginning of a journey that would carry her far beyond what she had ever imagined. The next morning, the waitress returned to her usual routine at the cafe, carrying trays of coffee and pastries, greeting familiar customers with a smile, and moving through the small space as if nothing extraordinary had happened. Yet inside, everything felt different. The memory of the night before, the sound of the piano, the applause, and the astonished faces of the guests played over and over in her mind. She felt a mix of excitement and fear. What if this moment had only been a fluke? What if people had only clapped out of politeness and not because of her talent? She tried to focus on her work, but every time she handed a cup to a customer or wiped a counter, her thoughts wandered back to the piano. She wondered about the host, about the way he had dared her to play. His confident, playful manner had challenged her in a way that forced her out of her comfort zone. She realized that she had enjoyed it more than she had expected. That challenge, that dare, had awakened something inside her she didn't know she had fully felt before. It was more than pride. It was a sense of possibility, a spark that told her life could be more than serving tables and cleaning counters. Meanwhile, at the mansion, the story of her performance had spread quickly. The host, genuinely impressed, could not stop talking about the young waitress who had stunned his guests. He mentioned her name to a few friends and colleagues, describing her skill with excitement and surprise. The idea that someone so ordinary in appearance and humble in occupation could possess such extraordinary talent fascinated him. Some of his acquaintances were skeptical, but the host insisted it was true. He even played a recording he had secretly asked someone to make, just to prove it. The sound of her fingers gliding over the keys, the emotion in every note, captured everyone who heard it. It was impossible to dismiss. Back at the cafe, the waitress tried to ignore the growing curiosity of a few regular customers who had heard rumors about her performance. They asked questions, subtly or directly, about what had happened at the mansion. She answered politely but carefully, avoiding any exaggeration or claim that might seem boastful. She did not want attention for herself, only for the music. But she could see the admiration in their eyes, the small smiles of respect when she spoke about her private moments with the piano. She realized that people could sense passion and dedication, even if it was hidden behind a humble exterior. Her friends from the neighborhood were the next to find out. They were both surprised and proud, unable to imagine that someone they saw every day, pouring coffee and smiling quietly, could create such beauty with her hands. They asked if she would play again, if they could hear her, and she smiled gently, feeling both embarrassed and honored. She had never sought recognition, but the encouragement of people who believed in her felt comforting. It reminded her that her gift was not just for herself but had the power to touch others in ways she had never imagined. The waitress spent the rest of the day lost in thought, her mind full of possibilities. She thought about the evenings she had spent practicing in solitude, about the dreams she had pushed aside because she believed they were impossible. She realized that talent alone was not enough. Courage was required. Courage to step into the light, to risk embarrassment, to challenge expectations. The dare from the host had given her that courage, and now it was up to her to decide how far she wanted to go with it. That evening, she returned home and sat at the small keyboard she had kept tucked away in a corner. The keys were worn, familiar, and comforting. She placed her fingers lightly on them, feeling the smooth surface and the subtle resistance she had always loved. She closed her eyes and began to play, letting the music flow naturally, without any concern for perfection. The melodies were simple at first, reflecting her thoughts and feelings, but as she played, they became more confident, more expressive. Each note carried the weight of her emotions, the mix of nervousness, excitement, and hope that had taken root in her heart. Her mind wandered back to the mansion and the host's challenge. She thought about how the music had changed the room, how the crowd had gone from laughter and conversation to silence and admiration. She remembered the moment of stillness before the applause, the feeling of being fully present, fully alive. It was a memory she wanted to recreate, a feeling she wanted to chase. She understood that the piano was not just an instrument. It was a bridge to something greater, a way to connect with others and with herself. A few days later, she received a surprising message. The host had sent a note, politely asking if she would consider playing at a smaller gathering he was hosting for close friends who shared an interest in music. The invitation was respectful, without pressure, but it carried an unspoken acknowledgement of her talent. She hesitated, thinking about the courage it would take to perform again, about the possibility of judgment or failure. Yet, there was also a pull she could not resist, a sense that this was an opportunity to continue exploring her gift. She accepted, feeling a mixture of nerves and excitement. In the days that followed, she practiced diligently, not out of obligation but out of a desire to improve, to express herself more fully. She experimented with new melodies, worked on dynamics and timing, and allowed her emotions to guide her hands. Every practice session brought a sense of growth and discovery, a realization that her talent had depths she had not yet explored. She felt alive in a way she never had when she was simply serving coffee and clearing tables. On the night of the private gathering, she arrived at the mansion with a quiet determination. The host greeted her warmly, introducing her to the small circle of guests with sincere admiration. They were not expecting a grand performance but were curious, open, and respectful. The atmosphere was different from the larger party. More intimate, more personal, and less intimidating. She could feel the energy in the room, a gentle anticipation that encouraged her to focus on the music rather than the audience. As she sat at the piano, her hands hovering over the keys, she took a deep breath and let the first note ring out. The sound was clear and confident, carrying across the room and settling into a comfortable silence. She played slowly at first, exploring the space and the acoustics, then gradually allowed the music to grow in complexity and emotion. The melodies flowed naturally, weaving through feelings of joy, longing, and hope. The guests listened quietly, absorbed in the performance, their expressions reflecting awe and appreciation. The host watched with a satisfied smile, recognizing that the young waitress had transformed the room once again. Her music was no longer a surprise. It was a revelation of consistent skill, of a deep and genuine connection to her art. The intimate setting allowed her to play with freedom, to express nuances that had been impossible in the crowded, chaotic environment of the larger party. She felt a sense of control and ownership, understanding that this was her moment to shape the experience entirely. After the performance, the guests expressed their admiration, some asking questions about her background, her inspirations, and her approach to music. She answered honestly, sharing only what felt comfortable, maintaining humility while acknowledging her dedication and passion. The host offered kind words, expressing pride and encouragement, and some of the guests suggested opportunities for further exposure, hinting at possibilities she had not considered. She realized that this was more than recognition. It was a chance to explore a path she had only dreamed of. The evening ended on a warm, uplifting note, with genuine smiles, handshakes, and quiet compliments. The waitress returned home, feeling a mixture of relief and exhilaration. She had faced the challenge again, but this time with preparation and confidence. She had not only met expectations but exceeded them, discovering a growing sense of self-assurance and purpose. The experience reinforced the lesson she had learned the first night. Courage and opportunity, when met with skill and dedication, could open doors she had never imagined. In the days that followed, she noticed a subtle shift in her life. The way she walked, the way she held herself, and the way she approached her work carried a new confidence. Customers sensed it, friends noticed it, and most importantly, she felt it within herself. Music had become not just a private joy but a shared experience, a way to connect and communicate without words. She began to see the world differently, understanding that hidden talent could surface in the most unexpected places, and that courage to act on it could transform an ordinary life into something remarkable. She continued to practice diligently, exploring new pieces, experimenting with emotion and technique, and pushing herself to grow. Each session brought insights and discoveries, small victories that built confidence and skill. She began to imagine performing more often, perhaps in settings beyond the cafe or private gatherings. The thought excited her, and she realized that her life could expand in ways she had not previously allowed herself to consider. One evening, as she played a complex melody, she paused and reflected on how far she had come. From quietly serving tables to facing a challenging dare, to captivating a room full of strangers. Her journey had been unexpected, difficult, and exhilarating. She understood that each note she played was not just music but a statement of her courage, talent, and perseverance. She felt a deep sense of gratitude for the opportunities that had presented themselves, for the encouragement she had received, and for the inner strength she had discovered. The piano no longer represented a challenge or a dare. It represented possibility, growth, and the unfolding of her potential. The next opportunity came unexpectedly. The host, still impressed by her previous performances, invited her to a larger gathering, this time with a mix of influential guests, some of whom were musicians, critics, and art enthusiasts. She felt nervous at first, aware that this was not just a casual challenge, but a chance to show her talent to people who could shape her future. She considered declining, thinking that it was too soon, too overwhelming. But deep down, she knew she could not ignore the chance to step further into her own potential. On the day of the gathering, she prepared herself carefully, practicing the pieces she had been working on and trying to calm the nervous flutter in her stomach. She wore a simple dress, elegant but unassuming, blending humility with a quiet confidence. As she arrived at the mansion, the host greeted her warmly, introducing her to some of the guests with genuine admiration. Each introduction carried a subtle weight, a recognition of her skill, and an acknowledgement that she had already earned respect beyond her occupation. The room was larger than any she had played in before, filled with polished wood floors, high ceilings, and walls lined with paintings and sculptures. The piano awaited her in a prominent position, its glossy surface gleaming under the lights. She approached it carefully, feeling a mix of excitement and apprehension. The host gave her an encouraging nod, and she took a deep breath, letting her hands hover over the keys. The moment felt charged with possibility, as if the room itself was waiting for her music to fill it. When she began to play, she started with a simple melody, allowing herself to settle into the rhythm and the space. Gradually, she added layers of complexity, weaving emotions into every note. The music rose and fell with natural grace, capturing the attention of everyone present. Some leaned forward, eyes wide in surprise, while others closed their eyes, letting the sound wash over them. The combination of technical skill and heartfelt expression created a presence that could not be ignored. The host watched closely, pride evident in his expression. He could see that this performance was different from the others. It was no longer just a revelation of hidden talent. It was a declaration of artistry, a confident assertion that the waitress was more than her job, more than her circumstances. She had found her voice, and it spoke loudly, clearly, and beautifully. A few musicians in the room exchanged looks, whispering quietly among themselves. They were intrigued and impressed, some recognizing the subtle nuances and technical skill that marked her playing as exceptional. The critics, who initially approached with polite curiosity, began taking notes, aware that this was not a casual display but a genuine performance worth attention. Every key she pressed, every pause, and every crescendo carried intention, emotion, and mastery. As the piece progressed, she allowed herself to feel the energy of the room, the collective focus of the guests, and the validation of the host's belief in her. She played with freedom and confidence, letting her personality and passion shine through the music. The room was transformed, a silent agreement forming among everyone present that they were witnessing something extraordinary. The music was not just entertainment. It was a moment of connection, an unspoken understanding that talent could emerge from the most unexpected places. When she finished, there was a pause, a moment of stunned silence as the audience absorbed the beauty of what they had heard. Then, the applause began, soft at first, then swelling into a powerful expression of admiration. Some guests rose from their seats, clapping enthusiastically, while others nodded in quiet respect. The host smiled broadly, clearly thrilled by the impact of her performance. He walked over and whispered words of encouragement, acknowledging her courage, skill, and artistry. After the performance, the atmosphere shifted. Guests approached her with genuine interest, asking questions about her musical background, her inspirations, and the pieces she had played. She answered with honesty, sharing just enough to convey her dedication without sounding boastful. She realized that people were not just curious. They were inspired by her story, by the fact that someone so ordinary in appearance could possess such extraordinary talent. Their reactions were a reminder that art had the power to break barriers and challenge assumptions. The musicians offered advice, expressing admiration for her technique and creativity. They suggested ways to further refine her skills, encouraged her to explore more complex compositions, and even hinted at opportunities to perform in other venues. She listened attentively, absorbing the guidance while maintaining her humility. The host continued to offer support, expressing his pride and excitement, and subtly opening doors that had previously seemed inaccessible. As the evening continued, she mingled with the guests, sharing quiet conversations about music, art, and life. She realized that her talent had created a bridge between her world and theirs, allowing her to connect in ways that words alone could not achieve. The experience was both humbling and empowering, reinforcing her belief that courage, skill, and opportunity could create transformative moments. She felt a deep sense of gratitude for the host's encouragement and for the chance to reveal her abilities in such a meaningful way. By the end of the night, the impact of her performance was evident. Guests left with a sense of awe, talking about the unexpected brilliance of the waitress who had captivated them with her music. The host was already planning future gatherings, eager to see her perform again and to introduce her talent to more people. She returned home with a mixture of exhaustion and exhilaration, reflecting on how far she had come in such a short time. The journey from quiet cafe worker to admired musician felt surreal, yet deeply rewarding. In the following days, she continued to practice diligently, building on the confidence and recognition she had gained. She explored new pieces, experimented with style and emotion, and refined her technique. Every practice session was a step toward growth, a reminder that talent alone was not enough. Dedication, perseverance, and courage were essential. She felt a growing sense of purpose, a belief that her life could expand beyond the confines of her previous routine. The story of her performance began to circulate more widely, reaching other musicians, art enthusiasts, and even small media outlets. Some offered invitations to play at local events, charity gatherings, and music workshops. She considered these opportunities carefully, aware that each step required courage and preparation, but also recognizing the potential for growth and fulfillment. The thought of sharing her music with more people filled her with excitement and a sense of responsibility. At the cafe, her demeanor had subtly changed. Customers noticed a quiet confidence in the way she moved, a calm assurance in her interactions. Friends and colleagues remarked on the difference, sensing that she had discovered a new layer of herself. She continued to serve with humility and grace, but there was now an undercurrent of pride and self-assurance that had not been present before. Music had become a central part of her identity, a source of joy, purpose, and connection. One evening, as she sat at her small keyboard at home, she reflected on the journey that had brought her here. From the initial challenge at the mansion to the intimate gathering, and now to a larger audience of discerning listeners, each experience had shaped her, teaching her about courage, resilience, and the power of self-expression. She understood that her talent was not just a gift but a responsibility, a way to inspire and connect with others. She played slowly at first, letting the music guide her thoughts, then gradually allowed herself to explore more complex and expressive passages. Each note carried emotion, intention, and reflection, a testament to her growth and dedication. She thought about the host's encouragement, the musician's advice, and the audience's admiration, recognizing that these experiences had expanded her perspective and her potential. The piano had become more than an instrument. It was a vessel for her creativity, a means to communicate with the world. As she finished the piece, she felt a sense of accomplishment and anticipation. The path ahead was still uncertain, filled with challenges and opportunities, but she was ready to embrace it. The journey from humble waitress to admired musician was far from over, and she knew that each performance, each practice session, and each moment of courage would shape her future. She had discovered that hidden genius could emerge from the most unexpected places, and that with dedication, courage, and opportunity, it could shine brilliantly for all to see. The next morning, she walked into the cafe with a renewed sense of purpose. The world felt larger, full of possibilities, and she carried with her the lessons of the past nights. Music had changed her life, not just by giving her recognition, but by revealing the depth of her own courage and talent. She knew that the road ahead would require continued effort, resilience, and passion, but she was ready to face it, one note at a time. The piano had become a symbol of her potential, a reminder that greatness could emerge from the most unexpected beginnings, and that her hidden genius was only just beginning to unfold. The weeks that followed were filled with subtle changes in her life. She returned to the cafe each day, serving coffee and pastries with the same quiet efficiency, yet she carried herself differently now. There was a light in her eyes, a confidence in her posture, and a sense of purpose that had not been there before. Customers and colleagues noticed, some curious about what had changed, others simply admiring her calm presence. The memory of her performances at the mansion, and the applause and recognition she had received, lingered in her mind, reminding her of what was possible. She spent every spare moment practicing, refining her skills, exploring new pieces, and experimenting with emotion and style. Each session brought discoveries, both technical and personal. She realized that music was not just about notes on a page. It was about expression, feeling, and connection. She felt alive when she played, as if the piano allowed her to speak in a language that words could never fully capture. The music became a companion, a source of joy, and a tool for understanding herself and the world around her. One afternoon, a familiar envelope arrived at the cafe. It was an invitation from the host, polite and carefully worded, requesting her presence at another gathering. This time, the audience would include a broader mix of people, some influential in the arts, some curious about discovering new talent. She felt a mix of nervousness and excitement as she read the note. She understood that each performance carried significance, not only as a demonstration of her skill, but as an opportunity to shape her future. She carefully considered the invitation, weighing her desire to play against her natural tendency toward humility and caution. After a moment of reflection, she accepted the invitation. She felt a renewed sense of determination, not simply to impress, but to express herself fully, to communicate the music she carried within. She understood that courage was required, that stepping into the spotlight meant risking discomfort, judgment, or failure. But she also knew that this was a chance to grow, to explore her potential, and to connect with others in a meaningful way. When she arrived at the mansion, she was greeted warmly. The host introduced her to several guests, emphasizing her talent with a sincerity that was both encouraging and empowering. The audience was attentive and respectful, creating an atmosphere that allowed her to focus entirely on her music. The piano, gleaming under the lights, awaited her, and she approached it with calm anticipation. As she settled on the bench, she took a deep breath, letting the silence of the room center her thoughts. She began to play with a gentle, deliberate touch, each note resonating clearly in the room. She allowed herself to feel the emotion behind the music, the memories, hopes, and aspirations that had guided her practice. Slowly, her playing became more expressive, more confident, as she explored the depth of her repertoire. The audience responded with quiet attention, leaning forward, absorbing each sound, each pause, each swell of melody. It was a performance not meant to dazzle, but to connect, and the room was captivated. As she played, she felt a sense of liberation. The piano had become a medium for expressing the parts of herself she had kept hidden, the emotions and experiences that words could not convey. The music flowed naturally, guided by instinct, training, and intuition. She noticed that the guests were not merely watching. They were listening, feeling the music, and connecting with the authenticity of her performance. This realization filled her with quiet satisfaction and reinforced her belief in the power of courage and honesty. After she finished, the room was filled with a warm, appreciative applause. The host stepped forward, smiling broadly, expressing his admiration and respect. The guests approached, some with questions about her background, some with praise for the technical and emotional quality of her playing. She responded with humility, sharing her experiences and acknowledging the dedication and practice that had led to this moment. She understood that recognition was not simply about talent. It was about commitment, perseverance, and the willingness to embrace opportunities. The gathering offered more than applause. It offered connections. Several guests, including musicians and enthusiasts, spoke to her privately, offering guidance, opportunities for collaboration, and invitations to perform in other settings. She listened carefully, grateful for the encouragement, yet cautious to maintain balance with her current life. She understood that opportunity required discernment, and she was committed to making choices that honored both her passion and her personal integrity. As the evening concluded, she walked home, reflecting on the experiences that had brought her to this point. She thought about the challenge the host had first issued, about the initial dare to play the piano, and how that single moment had altered the course of her life. The applause, recognition, and new opportunities were meaningful, but the true change had been internal, the growth of confidence, courage, and self-awareness. She recognized that these qualities were more valuable than any external validation, for they would sustain her through the challenges and opportunities ahead. In the days that followed, she noticed subtle transformations in her environment. Customers and friends remarked on the sense of purpose and calm she carried. She observed that her interactions were more intentional, more connected, as if her experiences with music had enhanced her awareness and empathy. She began to consider her future in ways she had not before, imagining possibilities that extended beyond the cafe, beyond the quiet routines of her previous life. The world seemed larger, more accessible, and filled with opportunities for expression and connection. She continued to practice diligently, exploring more challenging compositions, experimenting with dynamics, timing, and interpretation. Each session reinforced her skills and deepened her understanding of the emotional and expressive potential of music. She realized that growth was an ongoing process, requiring dedication, reflection, and courage. The piano had become a teacher, a companion, and a guide, helping her navigate both artistic and personal development. Occasionally, she received follow-up invitations from the host and other acquaintances she had met at the gatherings. Some were for private performances, others for small events or collaborations. She approached each opportunity thoughtfully, considering her readiness, the potential for growth, and the alignment with her personal goals. She understood that success was not simply about recognition or opportunity, but about integrity, consistency, and the ongoing pursuit of excellence. Through these experiences, she developed a deeper appreciation for the value of courage, practice, and authenticity. She reflected on the initial challenge and the subsequent journey, recognizing that her willingness to take risks had opened doors she had never imagined. She understood that her talent was a tool, but her choices, dedication, and self-awareness were what would allow her to navigate the path ahead successfully. As she continued to perform and practice, she began to mentor herself in a more intentional way, setting goals, reflecting on progress, and embracing challenges as opportunities for growth. She felt a growing sense of empowerment, realizing that her journey was shaped not only by external events, but by her responses, decisions, and commitment to her craft. The recognition she received was meaningful, but the internal growth was transformative, giving her confidence, resilience, and clarity of purpose. One evening, she sat quietly at her piano, reflecting on her journey. She thought about the moments of doubt and hesitation, the courage required to accept challenges, and the joy and fulfillment that came from sharing her music. She understood that her talent had been a seed, but courage and dedication had nurtured it into growth. She realized that this journey was ongoing, that each performance, practice session, and interaction was an opportunity to expand her abilities and influence. She felt a deep sense of gratitude for the host who had dared her, for the audiences who had listened, for the musicians who had offered guidance, and for herself, for taking the steps necessary to embrace her potential. She understood that recognition and opportunity were important, but the most significant transformation had been within herself, the development of confidence, courage, and a commitment to growth. The piano had become a symbol of possibility, a constant reminder that talent combined with courage could open doors and change lives. In the quiet moments, she allowed herself to dream, imagining future performances, collaborations, and experiences that would challenge and inspire her. She understood that each new opportunity carried responsibility and required preparation, focus, and courage. Yet she felt ready, confident in her abilities, and aware that her journey was guided by both talent and determination. Music had become both her voice and her path, shaping her identity and connecting her to the world in meaningful ways. As she finished her practice that evening, she looked around her small apartment, the piano in the corner gleaming softly under the light. She reflected on how far she had come, from a quiet waitress in a bustling cafe to a musician admired for her skill, courage, and expressiveness. The journey had been unexpected, filled with challenges and moments of uncertainty, but each step had strengthened her, deepened her self-awareness, and expanded her possibilities. She felt a quiet sense of pride and anticipation, knowing that her journey was ongoing. The recognition and opportunities were meaningful, but the true reward was the growth, courage, and self-discovery that had emerged from her dedication and willingness to embrace challenges. She understood that her hidden genius was no longer hidden. It had been revealed through persistence, courage, and the power of music to touch hearts and inspire minds. The path ahead was open, and she was ready to explore it, one note at a time. Months had passed since the first night at the mansion, and the young woman's life had slowly transformed. The cafe remained her day-to-day reality, but it no longer felt confining. Each morning she walked through the door. There was a quiet anticipation of possibility. She continued serving coffee and pastries, moving efficiently among the tables. Yet her mind carried music, dreams, and new ideas. The piano had become more than an instrument. It was a key to opportunity, confidence, and self-expression. She received frequent invitations to perform at private events, small concerts, and gatherings hosted by people who had witnessed her talent or heard about her through word of mouth. At first, she was cautious, considering each request carefully. She did not want to overcommit or lose the authenticity of her music. Gradually, however, she realized that each invitation was an opportunity not only to perform but to grow, to connect with new people, and to explore possibilities that had once felt out of reach. One evening, she arrived at a grand hall filled with guests from various parts of the city, some curious, some familiar with her previous performances. The host greeted her warmly, introducing her to individuals who had an interest in music, art, or culture. Each introduction carried subtle respect, acknowledging her talent and dedication. The audience was attentive, and she felt the energy in the room, a mix of curiosity, expectation, and openness, allowing her to focus entirely on her music. She approached the piano, the polished black surface gleaming under the lights. The keys seemed familiar yet commanding, a reminder of her journey from quiet practice to public performance. She took a deep breath and let her fingers hover over the keys. With a gentle press, the first note rang out, clear and precise. She played slowly at first, building confidence and letting the music flow naturally. As she continued, her performance grew in richness and emotion, capturing the attention of the room. Her music was no longer a surprise to those who had heard her before, but its power remained undeniable. Each note carried expression, each pause built anticipation, and every crescendo stirred feeling. The audience was captivated, some leaning forward, others closing their eyes to absorb the emotion. It was a performance not meant to impress superficially, but to connect deeply, and it achieved that effortlessly. The young woman felt a sense of liberation, realizing that the music was a bridge between her inner world and the audience, a means of sharing herself beyond words. After the performance, applause filled the room. The host and many guests approached her, praising her skill, expression, and courage. Musicians and enthusiasts offered guidance, suggesting opportunities to perform in larger venues or collaborate with other artists. She listened carefully, grateful for the encouragement, yet thoughtful about how she wished to proceed. She understood that opportunity required balance, preparation, and intentionality. Recognition was meaningful, but her music and authenticity remained her primary focus. In the following days, the invitations and opportunities continued to arrive. Some were for private gatherings, others for local events, and a few hinted at more significant possibilities. She reflected on each carefully, understanding that her choices would shape her path. She had learned that talent alone was not enough. Courage, dedication, and discernment were equally important. She approached each decision with careful thought, balancing her growing aspirations with the humility and focus that had guided her from the beginning. At the cafe, life continued, but with a renewed energy. Customers noticed a quiet change in her demeanor, a confident yet gentle presence. Friends and colleagues observed that she carried herself differently, with an inner calm and assurance that was both inspiring and comforting. She continued her work with dedication, yet her mind often wandered to music, practice, and the possibilities ahead. The cafe was no longer a limit but a space of reflection and preparation, a part of her journey rather than the whole of it. Evenings were often spent at her small keyboard at home, exploring new pieces, experimenting with emotion and technique, and reflecting on her journey. Each session was a combination of practice and self-discovery. She discovered subtleties in her playing, nuances in dynamics, and deeper emotional layers she had not explored before. She realized that growth was continuous, that every performance and every note offered a chance to improve and connect more deeply with her own abilities and with others. One afternoon, she received a letter from a music academy, expressing interest in her talent and offering mentorship opportunities. The letter acknowledged her unique skill, dedication, and emotional expression, suggesting guidance to refine her technique further and potentially open doors to professional performance opportunities. She felt a mixture of excitement, nervousness, and gratitude. The offer was significant, representing a possibility she had never imagined when she first sat at the piano at the mansion. Yet she understood that this step required thought, preparation, and commitment. After careful consideration, she decided to accept the mentorship, seeing it as an opportunity to develop her talent without losing the authenticity and passion that had carried her thus far. She began regular sessions, learning new techniques, exploring diverse styles, and receiving constructive feedback. Each session was a challenge, but one she embraced willingly. She felt her skills deepen, her confidence grow, and her connection to the music strengthen. The mentorship offered guidance, but the inspiration and creativity remained entirely her own. Meanwhile, the host remained a supportive figure, attending several of her performances, introducing her to new audiences and encouraging her growth. His initial dare had transformed into genuine admiration, mentorship, and friendship. He recognized the dedication and courage it had taken for her to embrace her talent, and he continued to encourage opportunities that allowed her to shine. She valued his guidance but remained careful to retain her own voice and path. With each performance, her confidence grew. She learned to read audiences, to adapt her expression to the room's mood, and to embrace the nuances of live performance. Her music became a means of connection, a way to communicate emotion and thought in a language that everyone could understand. She began to imagine a future where her talent could reach wider audiences, inspire others, and perhaps even transform her life permanently. Yet she remained grounded, appreciating the journey and the lessons learned along the way. One evening, after a particularly successful performance, she sat quietly by her keyboard, reflecting on the path she had taken. She thought about the first challenge, the nervousness she had felt, the courage it had required, and the joy of discovering her hidden potential. She understood that the transformation was not only external but internal. The growth of confidence, self-awareness, and courage had been just as significant as the recognition and opportunities she had received. Music had become a mirror of her own strength, patience, and resilience. She allowed herself a quiet moment of gratitude, thinking of the host who had dared her, the audiences who had listened, the mentors who had guided her, and the friends who had supported her. She realized that talent, opportunity, and courage were interconnected, each amplifying the others. The journey had begun with a single note, a moment of bravery, and had blossomed into a path filled with possibility, growth, and fulfillment. As she looked ahead, she saw endless potential. Invitations to perform continued, each one a chance to connect, learn, and grow. She imagined traveling, collaborating with other musicians, and sharing her music with new audiences. The fear and hesitation that had once held her back had transformed into determination, focus, and excitement. She understood that her life had changed irrevocably, not only because of talent but because of the choices she had made, the courage she had embraced, and the dedication she had maintained. The cafe remained part of her life, but no longer the limit of it. She approached her work with joy, understanding, and patience, often reflecting on the lessons she had learned from balancing her daily responsibilities with her passion for music. She continued to serve customers with care and attention, bringing a sense of calm, respect, and professionalism that was now informed by her growth and confidence. Her music and her work intertwined, each enriching the other, creating a sense of balance and fulfillment. As she prepared for another performance, she felt a familiar excitement, tempered by experience and preparation. The piano awaited, the audience anticipated, and she felt ready to share her music once again. She understood that each note carried not only technical skill but emotion, experience, and courage. Her journey from a quiet waitress to an admired musician had been marked by moments of bravery, reflection, and discovery, and she embraced the future with hope and determination. That night, as she played, the room was filled with the sound of her talent, dedication, and heart. Each melody was precise yet expressive, each chord a reflection of her journey, each pause a moment of connection. The audience was captivated, moved not only by the music but by the story it represented. A story of courage, growth, and hidden potential revealed. She smiled quietly, feeling the fulfillment that came from embracing her gift and sharing it authentically with the world. When the performance ended, the applause was heartfelt, filled with admiration and respect. The host approached her, smiling warmly, acknowledging the journey she had taken and the talent she had cultivated. Guests approached with gratitude, curiosity, and encouragement, offering opportunities and connections. She felt a quiet pride, not from recognition alone, but from the understanding that she had embraced her potential, taken courageous steps, and discovered a path that was uniquely hers. As she left the hall, she thought of the first challenge, the nervousness she had felt, and the journey that had unfolded. Each step had been a discovery, a test of courage, and a chance to grow. She realized that her life had transformed, not only through talent and opportunity, but through the choices she had made and the dedication she had maintained. The piano had become more than an instrument. It was a symbol of possibility, a means of self-expression, and a gateway to new horizons. Her journey was far from over, but she felt ready. She understood that talent, courage, and dedication could open doors and reveal hidden potential. She embraced the future with hope, determination, and confidence, knowing that each note she played, each opportunity she accepted, and each challenge she faced would shape her path. The young woman had discovered her hidden genius and, more importantly, had learned to trust herself, her abilities, and the possibilities that lay ahead.